Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, December 7th. Oh, a day that will live in infamy. Um, after 9/11, we had a congregant whose grandkid was born on 9/11. And he said, we're going to have to get over this. Her birthday every year is 9/11. But I think, for those in the greatest generation, December 7th is their 9/11. So I didn't think about it until this morning.
Today is my nephew's birthday.
Well, yeah, these dates, these dates resound. So we are discussing Dinosaurs by Harvey Grossinger. As always, I like to, I got to bring it up here. I like to show you, what Harvey looks like. I couldn't find, he didn't have that big of a social media presence, I just this morning he does do this query, and I started looking for him on social media, on Twitter, and his students thank him on Twitter, which I thought was kind of funny, because maybe he just, that's not what he does. So I did want to read a little bit about him. Okay, well, this is about the story. One second here. He is in DC, and yeah, he's got really very short, even in Wikipedia. Oh, here's Sue. Harvey Grossinger is an American short story author and novelist. We know that. Oh no, wait, here, there's more. He holds a BA in English from New York University, an MA from Indiana, and a Master of Fine Arts from American University. He teaches at American University and University of Maryland. He lives in DC. He's a member of the National Book Critics Circle. He lives in Washington, DC area. His work has appeared in New England Review, Mid-American Review, and many other literary journals. So let's see if it says how old he is. Yeah, no. In Wikipedia, you can go in there and edit things out. So I can't tell how old he is. So did you like the story? Yes, Sue is saying yes, even though she's muted. I see her. Yes, you like the story.
It was a typical Jewish story. I think we all could relate to it in part. And I wasn't exactly sure about the ending. So we can talk about that.
We can talk about that in a minute. So, it's a novella about Jewish family life and relationships. A grandfather teaches his grandson about dinosaurs, but is disappointed when this boy later becomes a paleontologist. What do you think that some strong language and some descriptions of sex? Why do you think he was the father? Why was the grandfather disappointed? Elaine.
Okay, in whatever period this took place, it seemed like in maybe the 50s and 60s, men were expected to go into their father's businesses.
Oh.
And that's what he was expected to do. You weren't given a choice of what you wanted to do. You did what your parents thought in a lot of ways. And I thought the character development was so true to Jewish families. I mean, we all could find an uncle or an aunt or a grandfather that mentored in a lot of ways. I don't know if that's the correct word to use.
Yeah.
But who helped the grandchild and for some reason ignored the other siblings, concentrated on this boy.
Right. And, it came out that he was the favorite and he was left everything when the grandfather died. And next week's Torah portion, which is Vayeshev, and he's settled, the story of Joseph. and how Jacob favored him and gave him the damn coat and all of that stuff is, Genesis is full of, as I like to affectionately call them, dysfunctional families. But, we've seen this, here it is in the Bible, but, it's very, it's kind of heartbreaking. One of my grandmothers favored me over my sister. And my sister was very sanguine about it. And Arthur reminded me every year, my sister bought my grandmother these little jellies, which she thought my grandmother liked. And when we went, because we had to, clean out the apartment when she died, there were literally 20, 50 of these little jellies.
Oh my goodness.
Never opened. And then, Arthur said, do you think Wendy felt bad? I said, I don't know. So those types of things, even as adults. The one thing I noticed, Susan, and I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay. The one thing that to me wasn't really typical was the description of what was going on at the Shiva. All this backbiting and all this criticizing each other. And there was just so much nastiness going on. And that's foreign to me at a Shiva.
Yeah.
No.
I think back in the day when everybody made Shiva calls, I think that's one thing, this is Vanessa speaking, that the reform movement has kind of fallen down on. People don't always make Shiva calls. When you have to make a Shiva call, whether you like the person or not, there just can be a lot of people are grieving. People are not in shock. They're not in their right state of mind. If you read the book, This Is Where I Leave You by Jonathan Tropper, and it was a movie, it's hilarious about Shiva when his dad dies. And talks a little bit. Alice.
Yeah, well, Susan, I understand what you're saying about Shiva. It seems like you should be more respectful, but I wasn't really thinking about it in the terms of being a Shiva. It was, but it was a time when this family, which was kind of spread out all over the place, were all together, all the generations. And to me, I'm not saying it was my family, but I'm saying I thought it was very realistic that a family like that could come together. And it was like the uncles were fighting. I was laughing because I said to myself at one point, I should write down whose uncle is that? And then I said, it doesn't really matter. It's the whole idea of all these different parts and of the family getting together, and all the little stuff came out. But to me, I thought that was actually one of the more realistic parts. Yeah. And the only other thing I'm going to say, while we're talking, is that, oh my gosh, all the food stuff. That to me was very real. And also everybody's comments on Lenny's weight. And
I have that down as, something to talk about. I don't know if people would do that today. That was pretty. And
right. Yeah, but I know that the book started, it says in the early 50s when he was in second grade. So right. I'm not sure. So was this like the 80s? I don't know. I'm not sure, but whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Judy and then Sandy.
Well, I agree with what Al said. I thought it was the natural occurrence of what happens when people who haven't gotten together for a very long time, and there are emotions involved. I will tell you personally, my son-in-law passed away during COVID from cancer. We couldn't have a Shiva, and it still reverberates not being able to have a Shiva. The Zoom Shiva was not sufficient. It was not appropriate. It left us all damaged. So I appreciated this. And I did believe that when families get together, sometimes things happen. words are said.
Excuse me,
But I
Judy,
didn't agree with the ending because he adored his grandfather. Obviously, his grandfather adored him. And he's upset that when he compares his life to his grandfather's in the final chapter, in the final paragraph, he's upset that he comes up short. But on page 191, he's horrified that his grandfather was involved with Shylocks and did things that were illegal. He doesn't consider that when he considers comparing himself to his grandfather. And I thought that fell short.
Elaine, I don't know, and we'll get to Sandy in a second if this is what you wanted to talk about, but yeah, the whole thing that he was doing all this illegal stuff was, you know, a twist. Was it believable? Absolutely.
Yes.
Excuse me, Vanessa, can I just interrupt for a minute?
Yes.
Because I want to tell Judy, my husband died also in the middle of COVID, and
Oh,
we
I'm so
couldn't
sorry.
have any Shiva and except on Zoom, and it wasn't very
It's horrible.
comforting. It wasn't
was horrible.
comforting at all. And
Right.
it's horrible. It's just horrible. And you're right, it still reverberates. It's still,
I'm sorry.
yeah, and I'm
Right.
sorry for you too. But
Yeah.
anybody that I remember at the time saying when people were getting sick, oh my God, nobody wants to die during COVID. And then look, it happened in my family. So I understand where you're coming from too.
Yeah.
It was a terrible time. And, you know, Zoom funerals, Zoom Shivas, where it was a way for us to adapt and pivot during a time when gathering together was dangerous. And so, you know, my heart goes out to everyone. All right, Sandy, I'm unmuting one of you. Merle, you'll be next. Sandy?
I don't know. Having a problem. Just a moment.
One of you, you're on twice. So
Okay.
there, that's better.
I cannot get my sound on my computer, but I found I could be heard through my cell phone. So I just knocked out the computer the while, okay? I also lost my brother during the COVID, and I know it was awful. The Shiva was awful. We did get together in a home. It was really difficult. We were numbered how many people could be in the home. We had food box for us. It was sent by some kosher restaurant or service. Everyone had their own box. They could only touch their own box with their own name on it. It was very weird. And we got through the day, and I could go, but not my husband. You know, it was just, we were picked who could be in that house.
Yeah, it was very sad, all of that during COVID.
But in this book, I just couldn't get over. I mean, we should have been thinking about each person and how the death had affected them. But the author gave every page of the story had such vivid descriptions of everybody, how they looked, how their history. And so, you know, it just was overwhelming. It seemed like the weirdest family. I don't know how they reacted to one another, because they all just saw each other, as the writer drew the pictures of them, as very flawed people. There was a lot of unhappiness.
Right, Sandy, I would push back and say that's how the narrator saw them. We don't know that the people,
Right.
Lenny saw his grandfather that way, or Benny saw his father. We don't know what they thought. That's what the narrator thought.
But it was, in reading it, I was very uncomfortable with that, because as we approached each person, or they walked in the door, or they came down the stairs, we already knew too much about them and their flaws.
Yeah.
And some of the words that they used too, you know, were really vulgar.
Yeah.
I was uncomfortable with it.
Okay. I have Merle, I'm unmuting you, and then Elaine.
Well, we do get a little bit of Benny's point of view. Benny said about his father, fathers are not above the weaknesses of their children. So he was defending in his own way that his father had done some illegal things. And the fact that there were illegal things, Zali would have defended himself because that man did not go into a synagogue since his granddaughter Delilah's bat mitzvah. And we know that Lenny is 40 years old, so his sister's probably around that age. And he didn't go because Zali says, the God of Abraham and Isaac was like a blind umpire calling balls and strikes. So he didn't have much respect for religion. That was Zali. But the thing that struck me as being very touching was that his son, Benny started talking about what happens if you have an elderly parent who was sick. And the quote was, someone dying of old age can put a family through the ringer. Take my word for it. I feel terribly responsible, like I should have done something. It'll be a relief when we get him in the ground tomorrow. I thought that was very interesting, that when you do have someone dying, I mean, my sister had cancer for 7 years before she actually died. She had multiple melanoma, and watching the person dying and deteriorating for 7 years, by the time you get to the 7th year, yes, you want to put them out of their misery. And
Yeah.
I thought that was very, very true and on target. And then the whole death of Zali made Leonard reflect about his own life, and that his grandpa at least made things happen. He may have done it illegally, but he made things happen. He had a successful bakery, and then he had children and grandchildren. And at 40, what has Lenny done? He has a job teaching paleontology at Northwestern. That's good. He's divorced, no children. He has a girlfriend, but he just feels like nothing's happening in his life. So I thought that was very good and very realistic.
Yeah. I was talking with Joan at services, and I said, do you think I should send out a trigger warning? Because, some of these stories may trigger something in you, and this has death and growing old and a lot of things that are happening to all of us, or we know someone where it's just not far out of our human happenings. So I didn't send a trigger warning, but I'm glad that we're talking about it. And I think it's important to talk about. One of the things which I knew this group would, and then Lynn, I'll get to you, on the top of 175, the blood flow to his brain had recently gotten worse. They think he might have died from a ruptured aneurysm. Some days he thought he was Eddie Cantor. And I know I don't need to tell you, Eddie Cantor, was a comedian. There he is. I did have to look up the next one, or David. Then he had a spell doing David Dubinsky, who was like a union organizer. And of course, their pictures come right up, and there they are. And I think that was very realistic. We have, I have a dear friend, her father, who was a rabbi, is in memory care, and he thinks he's the rabbi there and that he's leading services. And I think until recently, he did lead services there. He was a 3-pack-a-day smoker, and he doesn't remember that he smoked. And now he doesn't smoke. So, all right, Lynn, I'm going to unmute you and go ahead.
Okay. I was not a fan of this story at all. First of all, I think he overwrote. It needed editing badly. The words that he uses, I thought he was amazing with detail. I thought the vocabulary was elevated, but I think too elevated and too many details. And then I'm trying to think, as I'm listening to you all, what is the purpose of that chaotic Shiva? I mean, Shivas are not supposed to be chaotic. And I remember my uncle at a Shiva pacing back and forth, and it was for I forgot for whom. And he said, and everyone was laughing and cracking jokes and hugging. And he said, this is what Shivas are all about. They're to comfort the grieving. They're to put perspective on people's lives. They're to ease tensions. And that is the total opposite of what this Shiva was all about. And so I'm trying to think, what was the purpose of the author creating a Shiva like this? And I go back, and I'm a great proponent of you parent like you were parented. And so we go all the way back to the great grandfather who never hugged, who never touched, who never showed any emotion. And then we come to Zali, who is and then I tried to see where they were hugging again. And yes, there was a rebellion against that kind of parenting. And my feeling is that he is trying to show that this is not what we want to go forward being. Picky, petty. We want to go forward caring about people and being mensches and being Jewish in the sense of compassion. And so in the last one, on page 179, I found a hug. I managed to convince him to head back home, and at the boarding gate, he engulfed Zali and me in his arms. And I was trying to look for that kind of emotional giving and emotional comforting in the story. And it does come as a result of, after which we have this Shiva. So the point of the story is, what do we take from death? What do we learn from people's lives and people's deaths? And I think the point is that we have to be kind. We have to be kind to each other, because this certainly was not the pattern in this family. And that was my feeling about the story. I mean, I just thought it was too long, overwritten.
Yeah, it was a little bit long and we got lost in it. Okay, I have Elaine, Joyce, Merle, and then Alice.
Oh, good.
I differ with Lynn. I think
Always.
that I do sometimes, sorry, Lynn.
It's okay. I love it.
I think that you have to remember the time frame. Number one, the words that were used were used when I was a child. We my family talked like that. Nowadays, it's totally inappropriate and wrong. And I mean, in a lot of ways, I came from a very dysfunctional family. And my grandmother did not talk to her sister-in-law. This one didn't talk, that one didn't talk. My husband's family came from a large family. Some people didn't talk. They argued all the time. People were not polite. We were not socially attuned to each other. And I think that we as a group sometimes think that things are rose-colored glasses. And we have to remember that people are flawed and they try as hard as they can. I think when the father took Lenny to the funeral home, that was his way of making up for the mistakes that the family had done. I think at the end of the day, if you could say, I did the best I could that day, you might have hurt someone, but I think people are disappointing sometimes. And I think that this book showed that human nature can be disappointing.
Agreed. Joyce, Merle, Alice, Joan, and Evie. Oh, wait, Joyce, wait. I got to unmute you here. Okay, and go.
I totally agree with Elaine. It's wonderful when you can hear the Shiva, where my father-in-law's Shiva, where we were laughing and crying through our joy and humor and celebration of his life, because it was wonderful. He was a good man and we loved telling stories about him. And we were all in agreement about him, and the focus was about him. But Elaine, I totally agree with you. There are dysfunctional families, and when they get together, the ickiness comes out and the claws come out, and maybe the Shiva was just the place where it happened. Yes, it was inappropriate. Yes, it shouldn't have been, but it happened, and that doesn't make these people evil, but maybe they were just waiting for the opportunity because they hadn't seen these other people in their family for so long that they needed to bring up what was bothering them for so long. And it's a shame that the Shiva was the opportunity. But, you know, it happened. And does it happen often? Who knows? We don't talk about those things. But I don't think it's so unusual.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. Thank you, Joyce. And now, Merle.
Okay. I thought the part about the phone call was brilliant. You get that phone call that your loved one died in the most weird places, wherever you are, or time of day. And he was with his girlfriend in a waterbed, and it's snowing outside, and it was just not the best time to get a phone call. And that's very realistic. And then you have to put yourself together, pack your suitcase, get ready, get on the plane, go to the funeral and the Shiva. And I remembered when I got the phone call about my sister, I was in my car going downtown to a workshop, professional development for my job for teaching English as a second language. And I had to go. You lose your job if you don't go to these things. You need to have a certain number of hours of professional development a year to keep those jobs. And I said to my niece, should I turn around and go home? And she said, no, just go to the workshop and then just come tonight at 5 o'clock. And I went to this workshop. I was completely numb, but my body was there. And that was what that phone call, it's like you remember where you were on 9/11, if you
Right.
think, where
Right.
was I when I found out?
Right.
It's like that. I thought that was very, very realistic. I thought he went through all the stages of what happened when your loved one dies. And that final thing at the end about reflecting on your own life. So yeah, I didn't enjoy this story. I thought the Shiva part was a horrible satirical description of a Shiva. I've never been to a Shiva like that. But maybe he was thinking it could be made into a movie or something. I mean, maybe he had some other ulterior motive. But I did think the part about the phone call was very realistic.
Yeah. And of course, today you have to make that phone call before people find out on social media, which is a whole nother thing. Alice.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with what Elaine said, and now Merle added to Joyce. I mean, I think we're talking about the ideal Shiva, but does that always happen in real life? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I'm not saying that I've actually been to a Shiva where the whole family was like at each other's throats, but I could see it happening. And Lynn, I just want to say something to you. You started out saying you didn't like the story, and I felt all your arguments went to like, there were interesting insights to get out of the story. It's not like I loved all these characters as people, but I thought it was a pretty realistic description of people. And so I did get something out of the story. I want to say one other thing that's kind of off the topic, but I mean about the story. I mean, definitely food was one of the themes, and the other theme was snow and cold and people slipping. I mean, I think both Lenny and his father Benny, I don't know if I'm getting the names right, but whatever, the son and the father, they both,
Lenny and Benny, yeah, which was confusing.
I think one of them fell and then somebody helped the other one up. Again, I didn't write this down, but to me, that was like kind of over the whole story, that it was cold and snowy wherever. I mean, they were talking about, this was going back about being at the airport and his plane was late. And I just thought that also, it kind of brought the story, different parts of the story together for me. And I thought it was an interesting thematic kind of thing that went through the whole story.
Agreed, agreed. Joan,
Well,
and then
it's
Lynn, I'll put
interesting.
you at the end of the list.
She kind of took my, I'm sorry, I don't know these names, but
Alice,
I first have to agree, I think it's with Lynn. I did not enjoy the story. I thought it was very, it hit you kind of over the head over and over again with these themes, which started in the very first opening chapter. I thought, you know, well, he's given us these themes of decay and revival and things. Why read the story? So I mean, I probably would have put it down if it wasn't for the book club. I thought it was kind of brutal. His vocabulary was kind of brutal. But the interesting thing, I thought, well, what can make this story really interesting? Why is he bringing snow in so much? So I thought about snow, and first of all, it covers things. And I thought that was interesting about Zolly, because you get a picture of Zolly, and then, you know, in the second, at the end, all these things come out. Well, snow covers up, and then when it melts, we see something else. And I thought that was interesting. And also, snow transforms its shape. It's cold, but it melts. And we as human beings, or as dinosaurs, we transform our shape when we die. We become something else. And that to me was the most interesting thing in the story to think about, and to think that Zolly, I thought it was a kind of depressing story till the end, when he puts on the shirt and he takes hopefully the good parts of his grandfather into himself and becomes maybe more active or whatever. So I thought that was interesting, but the snow was there, it was throughout the story, hiding things and then maybe becoming something else and transforming them.
interesting.
But, that's it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you, Joan. Evie,
I was on an emotional roller coaster. I've always drooled about being part of a large dysfunctional family, not having much extended family at all. And I thought, when I was a little girl and would go to shivas and so on and so forth, and everybody seemed to know each other, and we were kind of on the fringe and so forth. And in some ways, it really bothered me at the beginning. Oh, here I am again, the outsider. Then I almost kind of relished the fact that I didn't have all these conflicts to deal with. So I was kind of going back and forth, and I actually enjoyed the exaggeration. And I think it also, one of my quirkiness is I do enjoy, for lack of a better word, reading obituaries. And sometimes you just find such interesting history of people that maybe you knew, maybe you didn't know, and so on and so forth. And I remember the very first time that I ever went into the sanctuary at Lakeside was for a funeral of our former realtor that we felt very close with. And I remember her daughter saying, my mother loved funerals. She loved the Shiva, she loved the funeral, she loved everything about it. And knowing this woman who had passed away, Claire, I could understand that. And sometimes, you go to a funeral and you hear all these glowing things and you walk away and that person is so perfect. And then, now that you're hearing more and more of the individual stories, it puts a whole different light on it. Unfortunately, a very good friend of mine's brother had a horrendous accident the day before Thanksgiving. She called me the morning after Thanksgiving. She lives in Boston. The accident was here and we knew it was dire. And so we were with her, pretty much of the weekend. He finally passed away on Sunday and the funeral wasn't until this past Friday. And they were part of the Shanghai ghetto. So hearing relate those stories with a rabbi that I had never, ever heard of, who I thought was this Husset, the way he came in and found out that he's a reform rabbi and maybe does that and so forth, who was outstanding. And
who was it?
Rabbi Jury.
His name is Rob Jury. I've known him since he was a kid, and he looks like he's 10 years older than me, and he is 43. Because I know he's 20 years younger than me.
Yes,
but he's a lovely guy.
Yes, we were so impressed how he got to know the family and is talking about, but just the stories. And when I knew Marina growing up, she was my good friend the very first day of college, as shy as I was. She was outgoing and so forth. But just when you hear the stories, I guess maybe I enjoy hearing all these bits and pieces and the fact that families are somewhat dysfunctional. And so I, like I said, I just went through a roller coaster through it, and I did enjoy, although I think that it probably does need quite a bit of editing. And I was happy to get beyond the paleontology that I couldn't relate to.
Okay, Susan Wellick, then Lynn, then Izzy, then Judy.
Okay, in listening to everybody, it's obvious that we all read this story and probably all the stories we read from our own experiences. And so everybody looks at it a little differently. I tend to side a little bit more with Lynn, especially about, as I said in the beginning of this, about the Shiva. I found it so off-putting, the way those people were behaving at the Shiva. And I guess I don't come from a dysfunctional family. It certainly wasn't a perfect family, because no family is. And there were issues, but nobody stopped talking to anybody, ever. I mean, I had an uncle that nobody really liked, but I didn't find out about it until well after I was married, because nobody ever stopped talking. And everyone, and I know I was raised, I had a pretty large extended family, and I never recall anyone really talking badly about anyone, or and I come from the same generation that Elaine, who says she had a dysfunctional family. Mine was, no, all Jewish families are not like that. Mine certainly wasn't. So I'm looking at this story from my experiences. And that's why I find some of it, just not relatable at all.
I hear you. I hear you. Lynn, then Izzy and Judy.
Okay. I have a couple of points I want to make. One starts with after my mother died and Dove was sitting around with us talking about, getting the perspective of each of us. And he started to talk about difficult eulogies that he had to give at funerals, where people had said some terrible things about the person who had died. And he said, I would never, ever say anything malicious or denigrating to in any eulogy, nor is it appropriate. And I remember my father-in-law's, the eulogy for my father-in-law, who was a terribly difficult, ill-tempered man. And the rabbi said he had a heightened sense of injustice. So I thought that was a perfect way to describe this man. Okay, anyway, I want to get back to the title and dinosaurs. Our narrator is a paleontologist. That's really important in this story. What does a paleontologist do? He examines ancient ruins and people's bodies and takes off layers and to examine the essence of that body. That's what's going on in the story. This young man is in the midst of this Shiva, and boy, does he analyze in his mind. We don't get that. But if you look at the very first page, Zali says to him, know where you come from. The sages of Israel advised. He'd tell me his pale green irises as small as buttons. The giant lizards are the blueprints of the past. Study them. I think these people at the Shiva are blueprints of the past. They are not modern. And then on 183, he said, when I told Zali I was going to major in paleontology, I felt sure he would be delighted. Instead, he started calling me one of those Luftmenschens, men who walk in the air who don't have their feet planted firmly on the ground. Turned out, much to my surprise, that he had always wanted me to go into business with him and my father, or if that wasn't my cup of tea, to at least become a doctor or a lawyer and make a good living. He seemed disheartened when I told him what my academic advisor had told me, that studying the past was in the purest sense an effort to uncover something lost in ourselves, a chance to literally walk in the footprints of all our ancestors. So this young man at this funeral, I think this is a learning experience for him. He listens to all of that chaotic chatter and, to me, stereotypical. I was put off, as Susan was, by that Shiva. I thought it was really a stereotypical picture of Jews bickering and fighting and being petty and all of that. Anyway, at the end of the story, I think he is thinking about how he's going to proceed and is a little bit disappointed in himself that he has, if you think about it, his ex sort of really told him what he was, that he cared more about these dead bodies than he did about her. And maybe he learned after this experience that he needed to reach out more, to hug more, to be a mensch, but not off the ground, to be a mensch. So that's my feeling about the story. And you know what? So I did find something from the story after listening to you guys.
Listen, what happens when you like a story, Lynn?
Oh, you wouldn't want to know. Anyway, that's my take.
Okay. Listen, I have said before, and that we have Izzy and Judy, I have picked some books, and especially for my evening where we read the full book, and I'm like, oh, this is just not going to fly. And when there's disagreement, there's more to talk about.
Absolutely.
More to get into. All right, Izzy, and then Judy.
No, I agree with what Lynn and Susan said. I think that it was like a stereotypical, it was just overblown, the Shiva. And it made me uncomfortable. It was all the stereotypes of all the things you say, all the words, the food, everything. And he might have done that for a purpose, just to show, those things did happen. But I thought there were two couple of points that I thought when you drove home. First of all, his relationship, Zali's relationship with Lenny, started out with dinosaurs or just paleontology, it was a form to connect them and something that they were both interested in. And I thought that was a bond that was never broken, because he was his favorite, because he had time to spend with him and he loved spending time with him. And then when he said he was leaving all his money to him, I thought, when I first heard that, I thought, oh my God, he's got two sisters. One of the son-in-laws was already fetching at the Shiva that he didn't have any money. And what was going to happen when he got all the money? Well, something like that happened in my family. And it was worse. My father left half of his money to my 5-year-old granddaughter, 3-year-old granddaughter, and half of his money to my sister's youngest. My oldest, who was 3, and her youngest, who was 12.
Can you do that?
He did
Yeah.
it.
I guess you can.
He did it. He did it. We broke the will, but I'm thinking, how awful is that? And in this case, I think it was different. I mean, because somebody told my daughter, even at 1 year old or whatever, that your grandfather left half of everything to your sister and the other one left. I thought this was the same. It hit me as the same kind of thing, like so unfair to the sisters. But then when I heard about how the sisters talked about him, that he wasn't really in their life, that they didn't really, really, she says, I'm not here to mourn. I really barely knew him. And that's because you didn't have time for him, whatever. Then I kind of understood the reasoning between that because of that. And Lenny was the only one that was close in his life. So that kind of made sense. What happened to me made no sense. But I thought that was an interesting point that came up.
Yeah.
It resonated with me.
Yeah.
When you said there were going to be like some things that would touch us or just ring a bell with us, that really rang a bell with me.
Ring a bell with you. Yeah. Yeah. I have Judy, then Merle.
I was going to say something similar to what Lynn said. I believe that titles of books or titles of short stories are there for a reason. And that he cared about dinosaurs was really important in this story. And I agree that he analyzed all these people in the same way he analyzed his work. And there were constant references. On the last chapter, I changed into one of Zolly's long sleeve white shirts, the collar stiff as bone. Bone, it's dinosaurs. He did a deep dive into his family. And he felt he came up short compared to the one person that he respected. But the one person he respected had problems, had issues, didn't get along with everyone in his family. Did something
Was a
illegal.
crook.
Yeah, he did something illegal. So it's as difficult as studying dinosaurs. It's trying to make a purpose for your life that doesn't make sense to other people. And that's okay. I just think he came to the wrong conclusion.
Interesting. Merle, and then Merle. Merle. And then I have some comments, which I have to write down so I don't forget.
Okay. There was a grandma too, and we haven't talked about her yet, but she died of renal failure. And they were on their 60th, they were on a trip for their 60th wedding anniversary when she died on the chenille blanket. She was reading Agatha Christie. They had to airlift her to the hospital in Nassau. And what he mentions next, which I thought was extremely interesting and unusual, was that they buried her in the family plot and that Zolly had bought the burial sites the day before they got married. That is so unusual. I thought that's so unusual. At what age do you buy a burial plot? And I remember that we bought our burial plots when we were 50 because my father had died at the age of 52. So I thought everybody dies when they're in their 50s. So we bought our burial plots there. Now I know people in their 70s who are still buying burial plots kind of late in the game, but I guess they were more optimistic than I was. But it just that I thought it was a fascinating detail that Zolly was such a planner and that Zolly had lived through much more than Lenny had known. Zolly had seen a pogrom in the Ukraine as a child. He was much more multifaceted and complex than than Lenny had thought of him. And even the things that Zolly said were sometimes very poetic, like they went into the Museum of Natural History and he said, this is a cathedral of bones.
Mhm.
So he was much cheaper than really anyone thought. I thought the story was a little too long, but I realize now that I think he was pacing himself. The author was pacing himself to give little bits of information so that it wasn't all overwhelming at the same time.
We have Elaine and then Lynn. And I just want to throw this out there because we're coming towards the end, but on page 182, they say Schwarza, which again, from that generation, all of my grandparents use that, some with great affection, some with derision. And, it was written in 1997. I don't know a book written in 2022 would have that. Elaine, then Lynn, then Sandy.
Okay, I agree with what you said about the word, but number 2 about the cemetery plots. My family has a whole bunch of plots at Walheim that my great grandparents bought, and they bought so the whole family could be together. Now, when David and I die, my children are probably going to go to Shalom or somewhere. I can't see us going to Walheim. It just isn't done nowadays. And I think that Lenny had great respect for the grandfather, but learned at the end that yes, he was troubled or had some flaws in him. As I keep saying, we all have flaws. I had a grandfather that was the most wonderful man in the world, but yes, he had flaws. I go to funerals, and especially Rabbi Ike gives the best eulogies in the entire world. And I keep saying, would people say that about me? And when I walk out, I think about were they really like that? I mean, you can't say the bad things. And I think this story was much more realistic. Maybe it was a little bit over the top, but a lot of stories are. But I thought it was fairly realistic.
Okay. All right. Lynn and then Sandy.
Just one thing about burial plots, we don't have them because my husband said if we buy them, we're going to die. So he we don't, he said we haven't died yet, so we're not buying the plots.
Okay.
I said that's a real good reason not to buy cemetery plots.
And there you have.
Anyway, if you notice, and I'm sure you all did, when Lenny heard about the will, he said, well, this isn't acceptable. I'm not taking your bakery. You're going to hit, it's yours. So he's already being like Zali. I mean, he's being a mensch. And you know what? At the funeral, his uncle Micah told everyone that Zali took people as he found them. And I think Zali would say, what I liked about the story was his relationship with Lenny and what he did for him and what he took him everywhere and taught him. He was a teacher, a protector. He was fabulous for him. And so what he did in terms of illegal things, and to him, that was survival. That was getting money for his family. So I guess for me, sometimes you have to look at motive for why people do the things. At his heart, he was not a criminal. So yeah. I am hopeful that Lenny.
Okay, I'm just saying, Lynn, you like him more and more. That's all I'm saying. In his heart, he wasn't a criminal. Come on. That was terrible what he did.
Wait a minute. How do we know what our parents did? Do we know what our parents did to help us survive?
Yeah. Listen, I agree with you. The first year my husband, Arthur, did our taxes, his father said, report everything, be very careful. My father said, do what you want. You don't report everything. What's the matter with you? So you have to take everything in stride and see what your parents are really like. Okay, Sandy.
Well, I think that sometimes I think I'm an expert on cemeteries. I love cemeteries. Even on vacation, my best friend and I in the East used to go to old cemeteries. We loved to walk around very old cemeteries and read the gravestones. But here in the Chicago area, I do go regularly, not maybe once a year or something, to Waldheim, because both sets of my grandparents are there, and they're in different temples, so different gates. And I love to be there, and I'm responsible. The family knows that I always watch over the graves. If something's wrong or they've fallen over, I report it. And so Waldheim is really the history of the old Chicago Jews, and it's a beautiful place in my mind. Now, our graves are at West Lawn, and I'm so grateful that my dad bought graves ahead for all of his children and their husbands and wives. So we have a family plot at West Lawn, and the kids, my children, my grandchildren, and hopefully I'll live long enough for the great grandchildren that I have to go out there with me. They go past every grave in the family and they say, this was Uncle Dave's wife. This was Uncle Lou's first wife. And she was so sweet and she had curly hair. They know my stories. And there's one, we all stop and we say, that's the Mach Shefa. You know what that means, Vanessa.
Yeah. Tell
It's
us.
a witch.
Oh,
in
right.
Hebrew. Because she was the second wife and she really abused my uncle. And she was a really unpleasant, selfish woman. And so when they pass by, they always say the nice things about everyone except Aunt Bert. And we know where my grave will be and where my husband's grave will be. And our children have about 7 or 8 left empty graves there that they can decide what they want to do with. But really, you know, the cemetery is a very loving place. Each stone is someone that you loved or respected. It was a part of your life. And when I used to go there shortly after my parents died, I would take a newspaper, the Sunday paper with, and maybe a thermos of coffee. And my dad put up a bench, a beautiful bench in front of my mother's grave. And we would sit there. It's enough for about 3 people to sit. And we just sit there and we talk about how much we love these people.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be an unhappy thing when you go to visit the cemetery.
I think there's something very comforting about cemeteries. And, you know, we've had a robust discussion today. It's good to see everyone. Our next story is The Day the Brooklyn Dodgers Finally Died by Thane Rosenbaum. I don't know if that's an old picture of him, but certainly an interesting one. So I'll say that. So we're meeting on the 21st. I am working on our winter schedule because I'm going to be gone in January. I assume some of you may be in and out. So we'll definitely start up again, maybe late February, but I will get back to you soon about the January and February dates.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And then,
Good week, everyone.
right. And then we can discuss about coming back in person. I know Beverly does not want to, but we would have a multi-access situation, but we can discuss it. So,
Okay.
all righty.
Take care, everyone.
It's great to
Lynn,
see everyone.
maybe we will
Be
agree
well.
sometime.
All right.
Thank you.
Buddy Lane.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.